Okay, we're now live on YouTube. Thank you.
Is that right? It's the second slide. No.
We are live now on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, whether you be members, councillors, officers, or public members watching on YouTube, to this meeting of the Audit Standards Committee at Surrey Heath Borough Council on Wednesday, the 3rd of August. Have we had any apologies for absence?
We've received apologies from Councillor Edward Hawkins.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Has everybody read the minutes of the previous meeting? Are we okay to sign these? Yes? Okay, thank you, members. I can sign those now. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a peculiar or non-peculiar interest in the items? On the agenda? No? Thank you very much. Item 4, annual governance statement for 2021-22. I believe, Alex, this is your bailiwick. Right, take us through.
Thank you, Chairman. So if I could quickly run through the key points of the AGS statement. I think the first thing to bear in mind, so that we don't get any confusion, this draft AGS relates to the 2021 set of financial accounts, and it should accompany the 2021 set of financial accounts. The agenda item that's appearing later on the committee is for the 1920 set of accounts, and as I understand it, the AGS has already been presented to committee last year and signed off. So this draft statement relates to last year's 2021 set of accounts. It's a statutory document, and essentially what the council has adopted is we've identified a number of principles, I think principles A to F, and they provide like the governance framework within which the council's governance needs to be managed. And what we've done in this document is we tried to reflect what the council has achieved, as well as the barriers throughout 2021. Obviously, COVID played a part in that, so we tried to reflect COVID within the statement as much as possible, but we've updated sections relating to data management, data protection, IT issues. There have been advances in terms of how the council is managing its IT systems and the integrity of IT. We talked about investment and property and how the council needs to manage its investment and property transactions in terms of governance arrangements and due diligence around that. If I could quickly point out a couple of issues to members, starting at page 18. So the AGS asked the council to identify some key issues in 1920, and we need to reflect how we performed against those key issues. So we identified 5. Brexit arrangements, which obviously was key at that time, the London Road development, IT and business continuity, provision of new leisure centre, and the JWS contracts and the joint waste contract. So the statement has identified how we've developed and performed against those 5 areas. The AGS also asked the council to identify any new issues or any continuing issues in terms of governance for 2021. And again, we've identified 6 areas on page 19. The organisational restructure, that's obviously just gone through. London Road development, that's a continuing issue for governance for the council in terms of how we're protecting our funds and how that project is progressing. The property portfolio valuations, obviously JPUT coming back in-house and how we're going to manage that going forward is obviously of concern. and it needs to be properly governed. So we've identified that as an issue for last year. The joint waste contract, there have been several issues over the last year, 18 months, in terms of how the business partner has worked and developed the joint waste and the rubbish collection. So we've identified that as an issue. Responses to COVID-19. Obviously, COVID played a big part in 2020-21 in terms of how the council manages its governance arrangements around that. And we've identified some controls and some areas that we think need to be improved on that. And finally, we've got some issues with the delivery of the capital programme. I'm guessing with COVID and the delays with office work last year, some of the capital programme was either deferred or not even started. Obviously, the council identified a number of areas in which funding was needed for certain capital projects, and obviously some of those have been hit by COVID, and the work of the councils have identified that. So that's just a quick run through of the key issues that I think are in the AGS. In terms of member action, Chairman, I think we're asking the leader and the chief executive to sign off the draft AGS, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, actually. So one thing which is missing out here, as members know, we all have an investment committee now. The investment committee is going through process to get various investments, and eventually it comes to the executive, then to the council. I think it should be identified as an issue to be added into this. And also attached to that is the borrowing requirement for the council. Because the borrowing requirements, as we know, we discussed at the last investment committee meeting. PWLB borrowing has sort of slightly changed about 2 years ago. That we need to put it in to make sure that it actually fits in with the issues that may arise, and it needs to be monitored and signed up. Thank you.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the last one that was mentioned in regards to the delivery of the capital programme. And it is true what is put in this report, where we've had a report to the executive about one particular area. But it's my recollection that we have had several issues regarding the capital programme. So it's not necessarily actually delays due to COVID. My concern is actually not about that, because that is avoidable, unavoidable, we can't help that. But it's been more around some of the measures that are then referred to in here, where we appear on the face of it, subject to any investigation of Councillor Malcolm's committee, to have agreed or undertaken some degree of contract which has significantly overrun, and the governance and financial aspect of that appears to be questionable. Now, I'm sure that we'll get to the bottom of all of that, but that is something which appears to have happened on more than one occasion in more than one area. And I think that's something which I certainly, as you know, am very concerned about. I know that other councils are also concerned about that. We, as I said, there's going to be a scrutiny investigation on one matter, but that's something I do think we need to look very carefully about over the next year, because we can't have that really, or at least it's not clear as to how that may have happened or what may have happened, and whatever has happened we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that would be something, particularly with the delivery of the capital programme, that we need to be clear about, whether it's us, whether it's contractors or whoever it is. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying that we can't have a situation where we agree something and then there's significant overspend and then the taxpayer has to pick up the bill later on. That is not good. So that would be the area I would particularly want us to focus on. I'm sure that we will be doing so.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Councillor Bates raised a very valid point. I have potential in add-on to this. It's a governance issue overall, And what I would advocate as CEO as much as you, to say maybe it should be part of the internal audit process as well on a cyclical basis. So the process is checked, process is signed off, and the internal audit department should take care of it. I think it is important. I may have, I can't quite remember, I'm sure I may have raised this kind of examples before where internal audit needs to be expanded. I think at last meeting I did actually. The department should be expanded to actually protect the council and protect the actions within the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Only just to respond to Councillor Malbagman's suggestions, and I absolutely agree. There is a very close synergy between the annual governance statement and the work of the internal audit, because the annual governance statement identifies some areas that need attention, some areas of significant risk, demonstrating the organisation's willingness to learn the lessons from the year before. And internal audit is a very powerful tool within the organisation to help us to address those issues. And so I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a close correlation between what came out of here and what entered into the audit programme for the year ahead. And that's a really positive thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any comments? So I'm not quite sure this is for yourself and the leader. Do we make the suggestion that these three issues be added to this watch list, or is that going to follow on automatically into your programme for next year?
I think, Chairman, that the points that have been raised are valid and appropriate, and I think that they are already captured in the document. But I think what members have done is draw particular attention to them, which is really helpful. It's certainly helpful for me as being one of the signatories of this document. And I tend to agree that some of these issues aren't necessarily the result of one issue like the pandemic. They might actually be issues that are more long-standing, and we need to recognise that and address them fully. So having a capital programme that works well as an example. Capital programmes by their nature are about doing things that tend to be one-offs. A lot of what the council does is routine. We do it every day, we process the same sorts of applications. Capital programmes by their nature are more challenging. And I think as a council, we're very fortunate to have quite a healthy capital programme. There are some councils who spend very little. We, as an ambitious organisation, ambitious council and ambitious members, tend to want to spend quite a lot, make a lot of improvements. And therefore it's right to accept that there is a level of risk associated with that, and that we need to manage it proactively. And if we haven't managed that as well as we would like in the past, we have to take steps to do something about it, whether that's project management, whether it's governance, whether it's reporting and monitoring. I think all of those things have a part to play, and I'd be very keen under this item over the year ahead, working with internal audit to make sure we cover off all of those issues.
Well, I will give it to Councillor Baker.
Just on that last one, I think certainly it is right that we have a good capital programme. I don't get me wrong, I think that's a very good thing. My issue, I suppose, which is at the theme, is that when something is not going to plan, it's important that it's brought to the attention of the right people at the right time, and that then any further decisions are made regarding that matter. So if, for the sake of argument, the budget is clearly going to be insufficient and more money is needed, that's where we then need to make a decision about that, and it needs to be done by the relevant person or parties or whoever. Now, my perception, which I'm hopefully going to be wrong about, is that has not always happened, and that's the bit which concerns me. So that is the kind of area that I would particularly hope Mr. Roberts, I'm sure he will look carefully at over the next year, because we know that things are going to open other times, but that is the bit for us that is, well, that's the bit for me, and I think other members actually, is important to make sure that we address going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Malbagman.
Thank you. Chair, what I would like to do is actually the 3 points which are discussed and highlighted. I would like that to be included within that document so we don't miss it out, rather than relying on a minute or whatever it is. So it's in there. So the leader and Mr. Roberts can get together and word it accordingly and present it for your final signature.
Chairman, it might be then that the recommendation includes those 3 items and asking the leader and the chief executive to ensure that all 3 of those things are adequately reflected in the document. And I think that's reasonable, as long as Mr. Middleton is happy with that approach.
Yes, quite happy. Yeah, noted.
Okay, thank you. So I think it was Councillor White who said it first. Maybe, but I only mentioned the word recommendation.
No, it doesn't matter.
No? So are we all happy? No? Alex?
Can I just respond to Councillor Bates's
Please.
comments, just for the record? Correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years ago, the council did operate a capital asset working group, and I understand on the terms of reference to the capital asset working group, you had a number of capital projects, and periodically they were reported back by the lead officers back to that capital asset working group in terms of meeting quality, quantity, budget, and timescales and stuff like that. And obviously, it's the direction of the capital asset working group to manage each of those projects and act accordingly and take the necessary decision. Now, I'm not sure if that working group has continued to sit, but it may be something that the council, as a result of the discussions today, may want to consider going forward, because that will certainly help to reflect some of your comments.
Thank you. I don't know about historical issues, but I think we can rely on the chief executive and leader to implement this as required. Yes, are we all happy with that?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is the effectiveness of the internal audit function. Alex, you're up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I quickly run through the report for members and then take any questions afterwards? So members may be aware this is a statutory report. It's required by the accounts and audit regulations, so it's a report that we have to do. It tends to be annual, and it tends to be presented to the Audit and Standards Committee once a year, generally during the summer period. That's historically when we presented it. The main objective of the report is to ask members to note and approve the report. But if I could quickly go through the key points, just to flag up any areas. So the governing body for internal audit, there's a couple of governing bodies. One of them is SIPFA, and the other one specifically that covers internal audit is called Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, of which we are members of. And that institute has identified a number of areas that it considers to be good practice in terms of public sectors developing and implementing an effective internal audit system. So they've identified 9 elements. Now, we've reported on those 9 elements in previous years, and basically this report has updated work of the internal audit team over the last year in terms of how we continue to meet those 9 elements. So those 9 elements are set in stone, they don't really change, but the actual context and the content of the report and how we've actioned each of those has been revised in the 2021 report to actually reflect what we've done. So a couple of the elements, for example, is the adoption of a formal mandate. So we actually have an audit charter. That's actually a published document. It's been agreed by members in previous years. And the audit charter sets out the key responsibilities of internal audit and how we plan to use the internal audit function across the authority to manage the internal audit service. So that's one area. Sufficient funding, we've talked about that in previous committees. Competent leadership, I'm a qualified internal auditor, I'm a chartered member and a fellow of the Internal Audit Institute, so I think the public sector needs to have that sort of level of authority. Independence and objectivity, that's quite a critical thing for internal audit. We need to demonstrate to officers as well as members that we don't have a direct day-to-day operational involvement in what they do, because at the end of the day, we may have to audit those activities, so we can't have a direct involvement as well as then come back 6 to 12 months later and review those activities. So we are quite clear in terms of our independence and who we report into. If there are significant issues, I have a direct reporting line into you, Chairman. I have direct dotted line into the Chief Executive. External audit, possibly, if there are any significant irregularities or fraud, we could report directly into external audit. That's how the internal audit is seen within the council. The other area of the report, the other objective, is to identify a number of recommendations addressed for last year and how we've actioned those, as well as the challenges for the forthcoming year. So there's a bit of an overlap between this part of the document and the AGS. So we identify joint waste, the restructure, and investment and development as areas that we felt internal audit were particularly concerned about, and we needed to focus our attention on in the 2021 year. Joint waste, we did a full audit of that, Chairman. That was presented to CMT and it was presented to the Joint Waste Partnership Board, and that was well received by both of those groups. And the organisational restructure, that's obviously just happened. We're hoping to reflect the outcome of the restructure. One area, for example, is that audit is likely to move across to governance, legal and democratic services, and we're hoping that's going to raise the level of internal audit as well as governance across the authority, and I think that's only a good thing. And investment and development, we did an entire audit. We had a very big scope of the investment and development audit. A lot of issues came out of that, and obviously it's an annual audit, so we're going to be looking at that again this year and making sure that all the key issues that we flagged up last year are being addressed by management. So it's certainly on top of our agenda for that. Finally, I've identified 3 barriers or challenges that we need to certainly focus on this year. One is auditing in this hybrid workspace we're in. Obviously, a lot of staff are now working from home. That presents challenges for the internal audit team in terms of not having direct access to staff when we want them. There is a greater reliance on digital documentation. Traditionally, we've used a lot of paper-based records. Obviously, the council's now having very quickly to move away from that, and a lot of things are now held digitally. So we're having to access greater systems in terms of doing our test sampling and so on and so forth. The other 2 areas, staff capacity. Again, especially senior management are having to take on a lot more work with as little staff as they're allowed to, and obviously they need to accommodate the internal audit function. That's not always easy, trying to fit in internal audit function as well as delivering their day-to-day function and any projects that they might be working on. And finally, the results and any subsequent actions that the council's undergoing in terms of COVID and how we're progressing that and our move away from lockdown back to business as normal. So, Chairman, that's a very quick overview. I think members are asked to note and approve the report, but I'm happy to take any questions about the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, very comprehensive. Members, any questions for Alex? Councillor Barbago?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is a hobby horse which I raised with Alex some time ago. I think probably three times already. It's the capacity of the internal audit department itself. I mean, we have seen in the previous agenda item, we spoke about expanding it. And you are actually saying you're the X, Y, and Z, and you have given this report. I ask again, are you adequately staffed? Are you pushing your people to the maximum in terms of breaking point? Where are you? Or will you be looking to recruit more to help you?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a very good question. There's no easy answer to your question, to be honest. We work in quite a relatively small local authority. We've got a relatively small budget compared to metropolitan councils or unitaries. We've got a relatively small overall headcount. If you compare our headcount at Surrey Heath compared to Guildford, Woking and some unitaries, obviously we're quite small. So we need to be proportionate and reflect obviously our position in terms of the size of the organisation. That obviously doesn't answer your question. Are we adequately resourced? I guess you could always say we could always do with more staff, but that's never possible. But what we're trying to achieve with the work programme is we're trying to audit as many areas across the whole council within a rotation system. So that's to our benefit. So we're not trying to audit every area each year, because even with a larger team that wouldn't be possible. We're trying to audit as many areas of the council across the whole breadth of the authority in a 3-year rotation system, okay? And within that, each year, members approve the audit plan. There is some contingency within the audit plan. So if something comes out of the woodwork or something hits us sideways, we do have scope and capacity to deal with that on a short-term basis. But what we don't have within the team, I suppose, are dedicated auditors that, if you look at big authorities and private sectors, they might have an IT auditor. They might have a project management auditor. We haven't got those specific auditors. They might have someone that just deals with fraud. What we've got to have at the council is a team that is generically skilled, that we can cover the whole section of the authority. And that's how we've acted in the last few years. We have a funding and a budget that's agreed at CMT level and member level. And if there was a particular incident or a particular audit that CMT or members felt that was so crucial to the development of the council, I'm sure the Chief Executive and CMT would consider on a temporary basis increasing the resourcing to meet that need. But at the moment, we're delivering an audit team that is meeting the needs of the authority.
Thank you, Alex. So if I understand it right, you have a plan in place that is you're managing, but if something dramatic happened and you needed extra resource, it could be brought in specifically for that purpose.
Management would consider bringing in extra resources. It's not a fait accompli. There would obviously need to be a business case, yes, but if it was deemed that important, I'm sure funding would be made available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Malabag.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to put Alex under pressure, but I just want to truly understand. So what you said there during this long answer you gave was IT, internal. There you don't have an expert within your department for IT audit. Do you think it's a good idea to actually get an external auditor to look at the IT system, so you, the internal auditor, is happy that they can sign it off on your behalf?
A good question. Just a couple of observations about that. Within the IT service themselves, they do bring in external regulators. An example of that would be ISO 9000. So ISO 9000 actually reviews the IT processes in the council anyway, so that's one area. Another area that I think IT have funded in the past is external penetrators. So we have commissioned an external company to penetrate certain aspects of the IT system in terms of controls, data and things like that. And we actually fund an external company. They do that work independently, and they're far more qualified than an IT auditor would be, because that is their bread and butter. They go into companies, they penetrate systems, and they look at weaknesses in control. Even if we recruited an IT auditor, I don't think they would have the skills to do that sort of piece of work. So I think that's just two areas that I think the council does contribute in terms of that.
Actually, Alex, I can sort of throw in some personal information on this. My business is currently undergoing, as we speak, an audit for 27,001, which is the cybersecurity issue. And we have internal auditors, and we've brought in a specialist company to steer us through that audit and to get everything done. So I think you're right, with IT, we need proper IT expertise, and those people are rare as hens couldn't afford on. Anybody else? Anybody else? Any questions for Alex? No. We note this report. Thank you very much. Internal audit annual report. That will be Alex. Yeah.
Sorry to bore you all. It's like buses, isn't it? You don't get an internal audit report for 9 months and then they all come at once.
Yeah.
But at least we get them all out of the way in one sitting. So, okay, so just bear with me just while I shuffle my papers. Okay, so a slightly longer report, but I'll keep it as brief as I can then. So again, a statutory report is required by the auditing standards that we report on this to senior management and members on an annual basis. And again, it tends to come to this committee at the summer sitting. There are 3 main aims to the report, just to flag them up to you. One is to provide an overall opinion on the adequacy of the council's control environment. So that's essentially how well internal audit is doing and the sorts of areas that we come across over the year with our audits. The second aim of the report is to disclose any qualifications to the opinion and provide reasons. And the third main objective of the report is to present a summary of the audit work programme. So that's where the bulk of the text of this report comes in. What I should say, though, is obviously the AGS is on the agenda for this evening. There is some duplication and overlap of the data within this report and the AGS, because inevitably, if you're talking about governance issues, you are talking about a lot of internal audit issues as well. So the two really do go hand in hand. So there will be some overlap because that's inevitable. So if I could just bring to attention some areas for members then. So the report covers the financial year 2021, so it's a reflection on our work for the last year. We completed 17 internal audits. Now, as a comparison to 1920, I think we did about 23 internal audits. But obviously, inevitably, COVID kicked in at the start of the new financial year, so I'll come upon that in a second. The audit team identifies weaknesses in control and areas for improvement, and these are reported to management. So at the end of each audit, we will tend to write a formal report. That formal report then gets agreed by the senior manager or the executive head, and we identify a number of audit recommendations, hopefully to improve the weaknesses in control and to give some areas or scope for that service to make improvements, whether that's breach of control, improvements in service delivery, providing added value, reducing, mitigating risk, and so on and so forth. Very quickly, each audit report, we need to provide a level of audit insurance. So for those of you that are less familiar with that, we operate 4 within Surrey Heath: full, substantial, limited, and nil. Very rarely do we offer a full or a nil level of assurance. Now, the main reasons being, if we were to offer a full assurance, that means we're giving a cast iron 100% guarantee that everything is working properly within that service. It's very difficult to say that because we're not testing every single transaction and every single member of staff. We're only looking at a sample. So it'll be very difficult and uncomfortable for us to give a full level of assurance. Likewise, nil assurance. We would hope that if we were offering an audit report with nil assurance, that would suggest that management haven't actually identified or flagged up those key issues before internal audit have come in. That would be a bit peculiar because at that point, CMT should have already been notified of some key issues. So that could be a huge number of staff that are missing, turnover of staff, financial irregularities, fraud, anything like that. You would hope that that would have been flagged up before internal audit came in. So those are the main reasons why we don't report on those. Moving on very quickly. So for 2021, we reported 86 audit recommendations. That's quite a lot, I think. So that's 86 areas that we felt management needs to make improvements on. And out all of those were agreed by management. So all 86 were actually agreed by managers to take on. And out of those, 16 were essential, 17 desirable, and 0 best practice. We did an exercise between November and February to go through every single overdue audit recommendation with managers to make sure that they're on top of those recommendations and making sure action is being taken. And where we felt that action wasn't being sufficiently taken, we brought that attention to CMT. I think it's just before Damien arrived, actually. I provided a report to CMT on those overdue recommendations. The other key reporting issue is the overall opinion of the Executive Head of Finance. That's one of the objectives of this report, is for the Executive Head of Finance and the Council Section 151 officer to say that he or she is satisfied with the internal audit service and what we're delivering. And I got confirmation from Martin Home when he was president of the council that he was happy with the internal audit activity at that time. If I could just flag up a couple of issues, page 4, if all your reports are page numbered. So the report details 4 areas of activity. The first one is how the internal audit team will redeploy to help with the COVID national programme. Obviously, COVID kicked in at the end of March. Our audit programme generally starts April time. We operate with a 2-person team, and both of us will redeploy to work in the welfare cell, which obviously members and CMT were quite happy with. And it was felt that better met the needs of the council at that time by moving us across the welfare cell. I also carried out a number of calls to residents in terms of shielding customers and extremely vulnerable residents of the borough. So I probably made several hundred calls over the period April to July last year, trying to meet the needs of those residents. So again, that work deflects away from internal audit, but it was felt that obviously COVID was so important at the time. And as you said, Chairman, we can't be in 2 places at once, so we had to focus our attention on that. So that obviously did have an impact on the delivery of the audit plan. It's inevitable, but that's what it is. Key finance audits, every year we have to undergo 8 fundamental finance audits. So that will be debtors, creditors, main accounting, treasury, revs and bends. Those are typical audits we do each and every year. So I've given a very quick summary of those pieces of work in there. Elsewhere in the report, page 6, I've given a summary of the other audits that we covered last year. So joint waste we touched upon earlier. Payroll, again, payroll we tend to do each year. We look at starters, leavers, timesheet to staff overtime, the controls around those. And if members are aware, the council's moved across now to a new HR and payroll system called iTrent. And there's a number of associated weaknesses and controls that I need to make sure were in place. And we obviously covered that with the HR team when we did the audit last year. We covered a grants audit where we've looked at grants coming in, as well as grant payments we make to charities or third-party organisations, and we made sure the controls were operating effectively there. HR, we looked at a number of issues. I'm happy to take questions on that. Property, if I could just touch upon property very quickly, page 8. We did a large piece of work on due diligence and the safeguards in place surrounding assets that the council was making. The reason being we hadn't really done a dedicated audit before last year on investment in property, and the amount of money that obviously the council is spending and funding on that area of work is so critical in terms of the council that we spent quite a lot of time looking at that. We identified a number of areas for improvement. For example, the acquisition policy, making sure condition surveys are being undertaken, and we suggested 3 or 4 high-level audit recommendations relating to due diligence work to make sure that records are in place, there's a proper audit trail, property transactions and acquisitions are being appropriately signed off and discussed at various levels. The last section of the report, I talk about other audit work that we accommodated in 2021. And again, if I could just point out, these were at the request of executive heads and CMT. So it's not like we decided to cherry pick pieces of work. CMT approached us and said, can we accommodate this? Obviously, there's a discussion there as to whether we have capacity to accommodate those. The elections, there are a number of elections took place in May. We sit on the project team. My job is to challenge the decision-making processes of that project team to make sure decisions are being done correctly. There's a proper audit trail in place, due diligence is done, risk management process is being done effectively. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we got involved in the census. So again, in March, the census takes place every 10 years. Myself and Gavin, I think Gavin's here, we took part in terms of the liaison managers. We directly liaise with census managers to make sure that as far as possible, Borough Surrey Heath, we had as high a target response rate to the census as possible.
Hi, darling.
Oh, hello.
What are we having with it? Oh, chips, chicken chips, fantastic. We've got one of the beans to have as well.
Sorry, Gareth.
Yeah.
If there's anybody not muted, could they mute themselves?
She's now muted.
They've muted now.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah. Last couple of points, then, Chairman. So we get involved in the National Fraud Initiative. So I act as the key contact for the National Fraud Initiative. That's an exercise that's funded by the Cabinet Office, and what they do is provide data to the council, which is data matches, which we investigate, whether that's homelessness, blue badge scheme and parking, housing benefit. What we do is to see if there are any duplicates of cases which could indicate fraud. So we actually work with the Cabinet Office to try and reduce the risk of fraud. So I think that's quite a good exercise. And I've commented on, Chairman, I won't bore everyone, but there's some other errors that we get involved with. So I think members are asked, again, to note the report. I don't think it needs agreement, and I'm happy to fend any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arwigan.
Good. Thank you, Chair. It so happened we had a meeting this morning and we were talking about a particular part of investment and the maintenance program. I see that on our page, page 33 under property, you talk about land and property board, which is historical.
Yeah.
It's not there anymore. I raised a question with Mr. Roberts at that point, and this particular maintenance fund, it seems, was with J-Group, which was in Jersey, and it was being managed by the agents at that time. I believe they are still the agents. It would give us assurance that it has got adequate funds, and that if it's a sinking fund, how it's funded, because if there are issues coming up with the properties, we, the council, need to be sure the fund, the so-called fund, is still there, that it's not being sort of drifted around. So maybe you should talk to Mr. Roberts about that in detail, in order to do a special audit on it. I would recommend that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Executive, Mr. Roberts.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Malbanger. I think now that the properties that were previously held within the JPIT have been onshored, i.e. brought back under the council's control, the opportunity to not only manage those assets, but also to make sure that our internal audit capability is also has an opportunity to be focused on those areas as part of that cyclical process that Alex set out, I think would be really helpful. So yes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if we should have a committee recommendation that any councillor who accidentally interrupts a committee meeting should be encouraged to send a donation to the mayor's charity. But I bear in mind we know that person was, I'm sure they'll do so. The question I did have was regarding corporate credit card operations. which is on page 30 of the report. And I accept there will be a need for officers to have credit cards, or a small number of officers to have credit cards. Indeed, I have a credit card, corporate one, for my professional capacity. Just as a rough understanding though, I mean, how many officers are likely to have credit cards? What type of roles or activities are likely to involve this type of thing? I'm guessing things like booking hotel rooms for homeless, things like that. But it would be useful, I think, to have an understanding as to what that might be, because clearly that is harder for it to go through the process that you would usually have of getting two checks, two people to sign it off and things of that nature. So I think it would help to have a better understanding of that.
Thanks.
At my last observation, there were 41 officers. There are two cards. There's a corporate NatWest card, which tracks a fee, and that doesn't break down spending by category. We have a second type of card where the majority of lower graded officers would have. It's called a Barclaycard purchasing card, operating obviously by Barclays. That operates about 30 different classification of expenditure. So that could be on stationery, that could be on IT equipment, that could be on food and beverages. So there's a certain number of categories. Now, the reason why the majority of officers and council have gone down that route is because during the application process, the officer and the line manager needs to select which category of spend they want that individual to spend against that card. That actually gives the council a greater degree of control, because what you're saying is you haven't got a carte blanche to spend on any category. If you work in the Camberley Theatre, your job, if you've been given if you've been awarded a card, then it's likely that one of your categories will be food and beverage. You wouldn't expect an IT officer to have food and beverage as one of their categories. So that answers that. So 41 officers. I think there may be about 6 to 8 generally executive heads that would have the NatWest card, and I think that attracts a £10 or £12 annual fee. But for the Barclay card, we actually get a slight amount of cash back as well. So that was only introduced last year. I don't think that's an incentive to spend more, but it's just part of the terms and conditions of the Barclay card system. And your second question, remind me, Councillor, the second question?
Well, I was actually going to ask a different one, which is just one of the things that has come up in the past is regarding things such as expenses and people buying expenses, things like that. Now, I'm assuming there's been far less of that this year due to COVID, but I suppose just a reassurance that people who may have, I don't know, train tickets, hotels, or things of that nature for the purposes of work, that is also properly checked and things like that, because otherwise we're going to hear about it after the spending has been done. So that's, I think, just a reassurance on that.
Yeah, okay. If I could quickly come back to Councillor Bates. So in terms of the source of spending then, there are a number of controls that are put in place by the council. So those terms and conditions are set out at the application stage. So when the applicant signs to say they're happy to take on the card, they're also signing to say they've got to comply with terms and conditions. There are a whole stream of them, and we've helped to introduce those. We've upgraded those this year as well. And in terms of the type of spending, again, in terms of the level of control, so an individual would do their summary statement each month. That then needs to be signed off by their budget holder or line manager. So they would need to satisfy themselves that that individual spending for that previous month is for business needs and is in the needs for the council in terms of what they spend. On top of that, finance will do their independent check, because all credit cards need to go through finance because they're all paid by direct debit at the end of each month. And executive heads, as I understand it, are actually overseen by the current chief executive. So any executive head or head of service, the chief executive has oversight of all those and is currently signing those off. So again, that's a level of control. On top of that, Councillor Bates, I get copied in on all expenditure on corporate cards every month. So I actually do a spot check of certain individuals' spend, and I will flag up with the line manager any spending that seems unusual, seems larger than I would expect, or is on certain items of expenditure that I would think, well, actually, is that a valid thing for that service to be spending on. And IT is a good example. They have quite a lot of spend on corporate cards, and the reason for that is they do a lot of spending with America in terms of licensing, Amazon, Facebook, marketing. All of that has to be paid through credit cards. And licensing, for example, especially with a lot of our American licenses, we're talking about several £1,000s or more that can only be purchased through the corporate credit card.
I'm quite comfortable with all of that because I do accept that is quite appropriate for us to pay that upfront. It's completely unreasonable to expect us to do that. And just inquire one final thing. You mentioned the chief executive would sign off in regard to executive heads. Am I right in saying Section 1551 officer would do the chief executives?
Chief executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Bates. That's a really reasonable question, and it has a really simple answer. Your chief executive does not have a corporate credit card and has no intention of having one, so there isn't anything to sign off.
Okay, I would have no objection to the chief executive having a corporate credit card if they were so minded to have one. My concern would really be who signs that off, and I would suggest Section 151 officer or deputy or internal or somebody just signs it off so that there is never anybody signing off their own expenses.
Sure, that will happen if we ever get one. Anybody else? Any questions? No? You're happy and pleased to note your report. Thank you very much. Item 7, external audit update. Before we go into this, I wish to inform you that I attended a seminar held by the Public Service Auditing Authority a couple of weeks ago, at which the whole of the public service auditing system was gone through and discussed. Fundamentally, it is a comparatively new system. There are a limited number of auditors who are certified to audit public service accounts. That's councils, the NHS, the police, and so on. There are 8 companies registered with the authority, but only 5 of those companies have been awarded contracts. One of them, KPMG, who we used to use as our auditors, is not amongst that 5. So you can see that there is a large organisation that is not taking part in this process, which is, let's face it, making matters worse. KPMG, I believe, did not bid for a contract because they did not believe that they could make any money out of it. The price that was being suggested by the authority was not, in their opinion, enough. So the result is that there are insufficient resources available to do the work. The auditing work, I learned, is scheduled in advance. Auditors, we have one with us this evening, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this, they have an amount of time allocated to do an audit. If at the end of that time, the audit is not complete, they don't carry on, they move on to the next scheduled audit, and so on and so on and so forth. So you can see that if something is not done in time, there is a concertina of delays that get put forward and put forward and put forward. That is the situation as it stands. The Public Service Auditing Authority are really uncertain as to what to do about it. Looking in from outside, the whole thing is a complete dog's breakfast. We are not the only council who has not been completely audited. There are many others, many have not. Some NHS bodies are over a year behind. Police authorities haven't been audited. How it will end, I do not know. But what I can say is that our audit is progressing, but it is not yet complete. We have with us Michael Asari Bediako and Adrian Flynn. Adrian Flynn is our interim Section 151 officer. I have spoken to Steve Bladen of BDO this morning about the situation, and I believe that, Adrian, you are prepared to give an update. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Over to you then.
Good evening, members. I'd just like to give you an update of where we are with the 1920 audit following a meeting I had with Steve Baden, who's the partner at BDO, and Michael, who's the audit manager, yesterday, along with members of my staff and the revenues manager. There's a number of areas where BDO are requiring management responses. Issues around accounting for the J put is one area, and we've agreed with BDO that we will change the figures in our accounts, and we are in the process of redrafting the financial statements in those areas which they require us to change. There's some areas around, some queries around bad debt provisions. We've been working with BDO now over the past number of weeks, and I believe we're close to an agreement and position for a bad debt provision. And the final area is around collection fund and issues arising from BDO's own review of the audit working papers, which they have to carry out for their own internal purposes. I think all working papers that BDO have requested have been passed over, and we're currently dealing with queries and follow-up questions as part of the BDO review. By the end of this week, all follow-up questions will have been answered. We currently have a good working relationship with the BDO team, and both teams are working with a common goal to complete the audit as soon as possible. And that's the end of my update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Malvagan.
Thank you, Chair. I must confess, I am truly disappointed. We saw the minutes of the last meeting, and it clearly states at least at this meeting we'll have some sort of conclusion. Even at that last meeting, it's a statement I want to make. We were told very clearly by BDO that our Section 151 or the accounts department and the Section 151 officer and the team did not provide the information. And I remember very clearly, then Section 151 officer vehemently saying they had provided, and whatever they wanted, they were providing then and there for them to conclude the work. I'm sat here today listening to the same story. I mean, Jaipur is done and dusted. Yeah. Bad debts for last year should have crystallized or hasn't crystallized. That should have been done at the last meeting. I have an important question. If you restate those accounts again, I understand this is the second time it's going to be restated. Yeah. Why wasn't this identified earlier? So Adrian then and his team could have restated it then and there. It doesn't take long. It's a historical number. You're shifting A to B and B to C and so on and so forth. If the balance sheet doesn't change, you don't change. It's just shifting figures from one end to the other. On the bad debts, now I have a very important question for the council, because bad debts, as we know, at a meeting this morning, we did review some of it, and that could be the tail, if only the tail end of last year. They're crystallizing as we speak, some of them. Does it mean we restate the numbers now and bring everything up to date? If this doesn't come to a conclusion quickly, this is a never-ending process. I'm truly I'm disappointed. Furthermore, I'm disappointed. Steve Baldwin, the partner, hasn't turned up for our meeting, which he said at the last meeting, he would be producing a full set of audited accounts. I haven't seen that today. All what I hear is that we are still providing numbers to them. I find it absurd. I really do find this whole thing absolutely silly. Either we are incompetent or BDO are incompetent. I honestly believe our staff here, they have done their bit, given the information. If BDO is too busy auditing NHS, that becomes their problem, not my problem. I do appreciate what you said about going for the conference and listening to the waffle that was given to you. In a practical word, waffle is waffle. Reality, this is reality. We, the council, ought to be signing, particularly the leader of the council and the CEO, a letter of representation that has got to reflect a true picture of the financial position as at 31st of March 2020. What is it? I have no idea. I've got a set of draft accounts. If the numbers are changing, what is it? What are our reserves? Do we have enough money? Are we about to go bust? I don't know. To be honest, I have no idea. With that, I shall stop. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can shed some light on one or two of the points that you raised, I think, in that the questions that were asked of the officers were answered, but they prompted further questions. And in terms of the auditor, the question has not been answered. In terms of the staff, the question had been answered. So it's a question of tennis with questions and answers going forward. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying what it is. I'm also saying that having spoken to Mr. Bladen and Martin Home before he left, these issues could have been resolved in a face-to-face matter in about a quarter of an hour. But because of COVID, there was no face-to-face. You may shake your head or you may disagree with that. I'm just telling you what I have been told. And it kind of makes sense. It doesn't make good sense, but it makes sense of a sort. Adrian, would you like to comment further?
No, I would agree that face-to-face, dealing face-to-face queries is a lot quicker than dealing with a virtual audit due to the amount of time in terms of you have to print everything, out, and it's got to be written down in emails or in documents and sent back and forth. And it's not so easy, say having a screen in front of you to be able to point to various areas and various systems. Plus, you also have, to be fair to BDO staff, they're not, due to the virtual audit, they're not familiar with Surrey Heath or some of the systems which we have. So it's a lot harder for all teams.
Just really to draw your attention to Mr. Didiaco, who's on the call, who would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add a few things to what has already been said, and just to pick up on some of the points that the councillor raised earlier. So if you remember correctly, in the last audit committee, we presented our report and we listed a number of issues or queries we've raised with the council. At the time of that audit committee, those queries or issues were being looked at by the council. Subsequent to that, it came to light that some of the queries have turned out to be errors that requires the financial statements to be updated. Now, from an external point of view, and in terms of the requirements of the audit, we cannot sign an audit or give an audit opinion when there are misstatements in their accounts, and when there are material misstatements for that matter. We've agreed with the council, and as Adrian said, we're working closely together to resolve these issues. Now they need to produce a revised set of accounts that need to come back to us for us to go through and make sure those misstatements have been correctly dealt with in the accounts. Yes, we know it's taking a bit longer, but I think at the end of the day, the goal here is that we give an opinion that's true and fair reflection of what's happened at the council.
Thank you. Councillor Bates.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm a bit like Councillor Backland, because I'm afraid this doesn't make sense to me either. I don't understand why it has not proved possible to have a 15-minute meeting at Surrey Heath. I appreciate there was a period of time when that would not be possible, but we're all sat here in Surrey Heath in a meeting which lasted more than 15 minutes. Many of us have attended many meetings in Surrey Heath that have lasted more than 15 minutes. So I'm afraid I do find that particular argument rather difficult to swallow and rather difficult to understand. When we had this meeting at the last meeting, I can't remember, it's a number of months ago, was it April? Okay. We were given certain reassurances that this would be done by July. In fact, we raised concern that it would take so long. We've raised concern at that time about that. We were assured that that would be earlier, in fact, but July would be the latest, if you like, for tonight's meeting. I believe I'm right in saying tonight's meeting was actually postponed in order to allow the external audit to take place. At the meeting, the last meeting, my recollection, there's a video which I'll probably go and look at again later. My recollection was that there was about 9 areas that needed to be resolved. Now, and that there was some understanding about those 9 areas, and that there was an agreement regarding those 9 areas. I can understand in a professional capacity of auditing that that may occur, but what I don't understand is how we are in the situation now. I can understand there may be further queries from those 9 matters, but we still seem to be a number of months on. I do take the point the chairman raised earlier regarding the small number of audit companies, and let's be blunt about it. Surrey Heath is not the biggest fish in that. I'm sure that everyone's going to be professionally dealing with this matter according with every other audit that's taking place. But my impression, sat here quite bluntly as a councillor, is that this is a low priority compared with other audits. Now, so that's my impression. I hope I'm incorrect in that, but that's how it feels sat here as a Surrey Heath councillor. This seems to be taking far too long and is very unsatisfactory. And I do share, I think, Councillor Marvaganham's frustration with that. I do accept there is professional integrity and that you can only sign off audits that you are comfortable in doing so. So I accept that point. What I do struggle with is where the amount of time that could and should have been taken on this, and matters such as meetings not taking place, when it is difficult for me to understand why they haven't done. So that's kind of my position. That may not be the position of others, but that's where I'm at, and it is frustrating all round, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. Thank you, Councillor Bates. Anybody else? Any comments to make? Points to raise?
So can I just ask the one question? Why wasn't there a 15-minute meeting at Surrey Heath?
Each issue, as I understand it, was a question that was given an answer, and had the question takes a couple of days to get into the consciousness, then in a couple of days the answer comes back. So call it an email week. If you're sitting across from somebody, you ask the question, they give you the answer, and then it comes, well, what about this? And then, oh yes, I'll go and get that report. And it works like that. So 15 minutes, maybe. But it's the difference between email correspondence and getting a definitive answer there and then. It may take 15 minutes, it may take half an hour. I don't know.
Chair, just to build on what you said, and just also to alert you, the Councillor Wheeler has got her hand up. We can't see her on the screen, but she's there. Is that I think you know, members, from the last meeting that the audit started late. And I suspect most of what's been described in terms of not meeting face to face has been during the pandemic. And in effect, we're playing catch up for starting late. And exactly what you described, I think, which is that when the auditors are sat with the officers in the same room, there is a chance to deal with the queries, the follow-up queries, the follow-up queries, and the ones that then follow that as well. And that does work for a speedy process. Right now we're out of the pandemic, I'm not expecting that to be a reason for further delay. And I think, as members have already, I think, universally expressed, it's very frustrating to be where we are, not least because we would like to focus our attention on the next audit and not still have this one outstanding. But I said, Councillor Wheeler has said, go ahead.
Councillor Wheeler, sorry, we cannot see you.
That's all right. I'm sure that's an advantage for many. I would just like to say, I have to say the excuse of not being able to meet physically, to me, is a complete non-starter. We have Zoom, we have Teams. There is absolutely nothing that could have prevented the auditors from opening up a Teams meeting and requesting people to drop in to that meeting as required during the course of the day, as they would have done normally had they been able to come on site. So I don't think that can be viewed in any other way other than really a very poorly presented excuse. We work digitally, hundreds of companies continue to work digitally, and to use the excuse of not being able to meet face to face is simply not acceptable in this day and age. Thank you.
Councillor White.
So we've discussed in length what hasn't happened. So can we have what is going to happen now? What is the way forward now? Are we going to get on 15 minutes or not?
That's a very good question. It was mentioned about another timescale. Could you repeat that, please, Adrian?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
You mentioned that you've had discussions, there's going to be a timescale of events leading up to a conclusion. Could you reiterate that, please?
Well, I'm about to review the draft set of accounts. They will go back to BDO for review, and there'll be maybe some follow-up questions from that. And then I'm hoping that both BDO and ourselves will be in a position that we finally, we agree to find a position, and that the audit can be drawn to a conclusion.
Any idea of when?
Michael might. I'm hoping to be able to send the draft set of accounts to them in the next day or so, and then it's what resources Michael has at BDO to review them and come back to us.
So in a couple of days, you'll be sending accounts, and then we will get a response, and that will probably involve some more questions.
I suspect there'll be some follow-up questions.
But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malvagabond.
Thank you, Chair. I was not sorry. I was not going to come back again, but it's getting rather silly. What we'd like to know, our interim section 151 officer says he'll give it to video within the next 3 days. Can we hear from video as to, I mean, this is a ping pong. I'm trying to play with them now. They tell us when they would give it back. Yeah, add another 2 months and say that's the final date. I mean, let's get a date out of this. Otherwise, it's going to be informing all over the place. So, Chairman, it's over to you, because this is frustrating.
I bet you're not as frustrated as I am. Michael, could you give us some idea of a potential date when we might get, if you get all the information that you have requested, And given going back and forward a few times for questions, when we might see the final report?
Thank you, Chair. Before I respond to your question, just want to add something to what Councillor Victoria said. So it's not like we didn't use the available technology in this audit. Adrian and the finance team will attest to that. We've used Zoom, we've used whatever available technology there is. Some of the questions and the queries we raised were more technical, which requires a lot more time for the council to deal with it and respond to us. So it's not via email and email only. We've explored all the available technologies and ways to get this audit up and running and get it to a decent and a more reliable conclusion. Back to your question. I mean, to sit here and tell you that we will complete the audit in 2 days or 3 days' time, I think will be very difficult because we have not had, or we've not seen the revised accounts yet. Now we're talking about errors that are material, which means we have to make sure they've been corrected in the accounts to our satisfaction. Now, as soon as we get, what I can guarantee is as soon as we get the accounts, I've got a team that is ready to review that and get that process going. We don't know what we will get. It may be that there are more errors in terms of correcting the errors, that things haven't gone the way we expect, which will require more time from us to point them out to Adrian and the team, and possibly them taking some time to correct that again. But if what we get is what we expect, then I can guarantee you that the process will be brought to a very quick conclusion.
Thank you. I hesitate to suggest that if we aim for another meeting at the beginning of September, we might actually have some accounts to review, an audited accounts to review. Does that make sense to you, Michael and Adrian?
Yeah, that's very feasible. That's very feasible given where we are.
That's feasible from my point of view.
You do realise that it's burning at the stake if it doesn't happen. Are we happy to look forward to seeing some results in September?
We have the choice.
Yeah. Okay. I'm afraid that's we've nailed you down to September, and I look forward to receiving reports in advance of that, so that we can all see what we've been talking about for the past couple of years. Thank you very much for your participation. Where are we? Next meeting. Do we have any idea? September?
It's scheduled for Monday, the 20th of September.
Monday, the 20th of September. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming, and thank you for watching and listening. Good night.
It's got the aircon, haven't they?
Still on.
Still live.